Good afternoon, everyone. So I am Mohammed Daroubi, a postdoctoral fellow at the Canadian Institute for Cybersecurity. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar of the 2023 Cybersecurity Awareness Month. The primary aim of this month is to increase the public understanding concerning the critical importance of cybersecurity, as well as the countless threats that exist in the digital landscape. Throughout October, we will be privileged to hear from distinguished experts in the field, individuals who shared and will share their knowledge and insights with us. It's been an enlightening series that underscored the ever-evolving world of cybersecurity. Today, we will have a talk by Karl Holmqvist on the interesting topic that's related to the quantum threat. The format of this will be 20 minutes presentation followed by a 10 minutes Q&A session. I encourage you all to engage with our speaker, ask questions. So now, before we delve to the talk, allow me to read the biography of our esteemed speaker of today. So Karl, the founder and CEO of Lastwall, has been a cybersecurity enthusiast since the 90s. His security journey evolved in the early 2000s with the creation of Canada's first high-speed mobile data network, which formed the foundation for Karl's career building secure critical infrastructure. Karl built Lastwall, a PKI-based identity platform to protect cloud services, private networks, and IT systems from the current and emerging threats. Deployed with the Department of Defense since 2017. Lastwall has scaled to serve various US and Canadian government defense and critical infrastructure entities. Beyond his professional achievements, Karl is a strong advocate for quantum resilient cryptography and helps educate the technology community on the implications of the quantum computing. He is a respected voice in the cybersecurity community, serving as a contributor in various industry publications and speaker at a critical infrastructure and cybersecurity conferences. His commitment to the field extends to monitoring entrepreneurs and volunteering with the security-oriented nonprofits. So it's our privilege to welcome you, Karl, to this talk, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mohammed. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you to the CIC for having me on. Quantum cryptography, as you've mentioned, is a subject that is near to my heart. So I hope everyone will find this interesting. To start off, I think if we move into an opening quote, as we come into 2023 and shortly into 2024, we find ourselves in a really interesting situation. And this quote, I think, highlights that while quantum computers present incredible opportunities, the class break for cryptography that they present too is something that can change our way of life and can change much about the way that we have to deal with our internet connections and the way in which we live online. As society, we need to really deal with this issue quickly and effectively. And so what I hope to do today is to give you an overview of what the threat is, what we can do about it, and leave you with a few takeaways to have everyone here think about how we can make ourselves more secure in the face of this incredible new technology. So just backgrounding and moving back a little bit, if we move to quantum computer fundamentals, because there's something that I come across regularly is a lot of misunderstanding about what quantum computing can do and what it is. So I think that if I sort of were to back up and say, what is a quantum computer or what's a qubit and how is it used? Unlike classical bits that we're all used to, a quantum bit can exist in a superposition. And what that really means is that it can perform different operations and computations of zeros and ones simultaneously. So while these computers are still in a very early developmental phase, the potential for dramatic improvements in certain types of processes exist. However, right now, these things are still fragile. So we have this idea of, wow, we could build a new quantum computer and this can perform certain algorithms very, very well. But it's not like we'll all be playing video games in a quantum computer in a few years. These are, as of yet, not general purpose systems. They're very, very specific, and they're still quite small in comparison. Very quickly, just sort of jumping back, we're here to talk about quantum cryptography, or the quantum future, and how to secure it, and hybrid cryptography. I was opening with this quote originally, and what I really want to have everyone think about is when you have a cryptographic class break, as is presented by the development of a quantum computer, that creates a significant risk to all modern systems that underpin the internet, and really will change the way that our society works if we don't get this right. So from my perspective, this is an important issue, and we all need to pay attention, because if we work together and we work quickly, we can prevent this from being a major issue. So carrying on, just a bit of background for those who aren't as familiar, because I'm asked this regularly: what is a quantum computer, and how does it work? Are these things that we would be, playing video games on in a few years? And the answer is no. A quantum computer is not a general purpose computer at this point. Our most advanced systems are usually in the hundreds or low thousands of qubits now. And what makes a quantum computer different is the fact that, unlike classical bits, we have the ability to have a superposition of 1 and 0. And that means that you have a situation where we can perform different types of computations on all possible combinations of 1s and 0s simultaneously. And while these are still very early in their development life cycle, there's dramatic potential for speed up of certain types of algorithms, and for certain problems. An example we'll get into is factoring large numbers, because that affects security. But at this point, most quantum computers are very, very large and physically, and require some very interesting operating conditions, sometimes extremely low temperatures. And while organizations like PsiQuantum are working on scalable quantum computers, the reality today is that we don't have capability at this point. So if I go from there and I jump over and just give everyone a refresher on cryptography, our modern crypto systems work because we can take a mathematical operation that is difficult one way and easy other way. These are generally called trapdoor functions. So the example that I think we'll probably dive into here is when we have our current asymmetric cryptography systems, like RSA, for example. That works really well because we can take two very large prime numbers, multiply them together, and then it's very, very difficult to take the product of those two large primes and go backwards and factor those in a classical computer. This is something, though, that in 1994, I'll get into Peter Shor's algorithm a little bit, but Shor's algorithm allows for exponentially faster factorization, and that's going to change the way that cryptography works. And another piece that will change the way cryptography works is probably Grover's algorithm, which impacts symmetric key search, or search space, I should say. We won't get into that as much, but both of these things, just to frame these problems, are somewhere in the million to 20 million qubit range required, given current noisy intermediate system quantum computers that we have. So I'll jump in here with Shor's as a first example, because that's probably the most interesting quantum algorithm from a security standpoint. So in 1994, Peter Shor developed his factorization algorithm, and what it does is it allows you to find the prime factors of an integer exponentially faster than we could with a current quantum computer. And if you look at integer factorization and the two other hard math trapdoor functions that we use for elliptic curve cryptography and discrete log problems, for things like key exchange, we end up in a situation where all three of these are broken by Shor's algorithm. And the implication of that are all widely deployed public key cryptography systems, like the one that we're using probably today on our video call, will not be secure anymore. And so, at this point, we can say that Shor's algorithm exists. In 94, it was proved. But the breakthrough, I think, that I would frame happened about 20 years ago when Shor's algorithm was actually used and proven on a nuclear magnetic resonance system that did factorization of 15. Now, as a math problem, it's not particularly difficult to factor 15, but if we looked at the implications of showing that this system or this algorithm is implementable on a quantum computer or with quantum states in play, that is a really concerning problem, because now we know that the algorithm is theoretically possible and can be proven. So since that time, we've gone from very small numbers of qubits. We're starting to build towards larger number of qubits, and there's a lot of discussion around Shor's algorithm being able to be implemented. Most of the time, people talk about the target for implementing Shor's as being about 20 million qubits. And the reason for that is because right now there's a lot of errors in our quantum computers. We call them noisy systems because there are a lot of those errors. So to be able to actually implement Shor's algorithm with the number of functional qubits we need, that puts us in a situation where there are estimates that we need about 20 million qubit systems. And that is currently quite a ways from where we are. IBM are working on a system, for example, that has 433 qubits. We're definitely on the way. But until we get to a point where we have much larger systems, a lot of people would posit that we do not have a problem. And that's, I think, what is concerning to me. Because if you actually look deeply into Shor's algorithm, or if you sort of read it through, you end up in a situation where you need about 2n plus 2 qubits, if they are fault tolerant qubits, to run Shor's. So that 20 million qubit assumption, if we start looking at that, we can say, well, if we started working on error correction, and folks at places like Google have been working on error correction, a number of the other operators of quantum systems are working on error correction. So as we move towards fault tolerant systems, we are going to see the number of qubits to get a functional, let's say for RSA 2048, if we think of that being somewhere around the 4,000 to 5,000 qubit range, to get 5,000 functional qubits, we don't need as many to do the error correcting as I think that maybe the 20 million assumption had stated. So that puts us in a position where, well, one, we know that quantum computers can run Shor's algorithm. Two, we know that Shor's algorithm will change the asymmetric cryptography security that we currently deploy on the vast majority of internet systems. And three, we know that there's a timeline somewhere between now and a 20 million qubit threshold where we're going to be able to deploy and break this current cryptography that we have. I think naturally that lends a lot of us to think, well, this is a problem we should fix down the road when there is a functional quantum computer that can run Shor's, or preferably just before that. And I think that's something that I'd like to sort of adjust and frame in terms of people's understanding, because there are problems going on right now that we need to pay attention to as security folks and as people who care about cybersecurity. One of those is the bulk collection of encrypted data. So at this point, there are known campaigns, and you can probably Google Store Now, Decrypt Later, or Harvest Now, Decrypt Later to read about some of the current attacks that are happening. And what's happening is some of our adversaries or certain offensive groups are actually, tapping into, for lack of a better word, parts of the internet, and they're collecting encrypted packets. And what they'll do is when they have those encrypted packets, and later on when they have a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, sorry for the CRQC acronym there, but once they have a computer that can run Shor's, they will be able to decrypt that information. So right now, if we're sending information that is secret and needs to remain secret, perhaps it's banking information, or maybe it's things like cryptographic keys for other systems that we're sending. If I send Mohammed a symmetric key today, and that is something that is protected with classical asymmetric encryption, if somebody captures that, and in a few years when we have a functional quantum computer, they're able to decrypt that, they can then have access to that symmetric key. Hopefully, Mohammed and I have a really good key exchange process, and we rotate out those symmetric keys regularly. But the reality is that in some situations, sometimes keys are more permanent than we would like, or last longer than they should, or sometimes the information that we're encrypting is not just that symmetric key. It could be some other type of secret information that we need to keep secret. So the bottom line here is that we do need to take action on this now, moving towards how to protect against the eventual class break of classical cryptography. So that brings us to, well, what do we do? And, I'd posit, well, it's post-quantum cryptography time. So very briefly, there are a couple of different approaches to, well, how do we fix that? And again, correcting on some things that I've heard publicly said, some people say, oh, well, a quantum computer can break all types of computer security. No, very specifically, if you apply Shor's algorithm, you can weaken or break, asymmetric cryptography and specific classes of that. But there are many other trapdoor functions, those hard problems one way and easy another way, that are not vulnerable to Shor's factorization. And so in the background for the last decade, we've had a lot of work going on looking at different types of lattice and hash-based cryptography that is not going to be vulnerable. So we know these things exist, and we know that they can be used. And NIST, which is the National Institute for Standards and Technology, I believe, came up with a post-quantum standardization process, and they came up with 4 algorithms that they released last year after a many-round selection process, so we can start using post-quantum cryptography now in production. So for encryption, we can use things like Crystal's Kyber. There are many other quantum safe algorithms that exist, but this is a standardization problem as we try to change and apply these things to all internet systems. So standardization is very important. So Crystal's Kyber is our current candidate, or our current approved algorithm by NIST to deploy in internet environments. And for signatures, we have Dilithium, Falcon, and Sphinx. So that puts us in a place where we do have good standard approaches to how we do this. And we know that we need to deploy these post-quantum cryptography algorithms now because the internet uses cryptography that's vulnerable. And if we step back from them and think, what are all the things we would need to change? There are a lot of devices that have asymmetric RSA key slots and keys sometimes burned into them that would need to change and migrate. There are things like the basic internet connections that we have to do everyday things like banking or video calls or exchanges of information of any kind. And so we definitely need to start moving now to deploying these systems. And that brings up another point that people often sort of address and say, hey, Karl, well, what happens if these new algorithms break? And that might seem a little outlandish, but it has happened. Going through the NIST standardization process, there was a candidate algorithm that was actually broken by security researchers. So this is yet another reason that we need to get these things into the field and deployed, is so more people can have more eyes on them and verify, yes, in fact, these are really, really secure. But it brings up a question of, how do we deploy new cryptography now and still remain secure? And the quick and easy answer to that I want to talk a little bit more about today is hybridization. So if you take an approach where you have a best-in-class current algorithm that can be deployed classically and a new quantum resilient algorithm, you can wrap the key material in the classical key inside your quantum algorithm. So by doing that and creating these wraps, we create a best-in-class capability of current cryptography, and we get the quantum resilient elements. And that is a really important thing, because we can end up with a transition path to a pure quantum future when we're 100% confident, or where people feel it's time to switch over to, for example, just Kyber instead of a Kyber X25519 wrap. And we can actually start deploying these systems today, knowing that if something did happen to that PQC algorithm, we would still be at least as secure as we currently are. So this is a really good approach to get started. And it seems like if you look at the external environment, we're developing more quickly on mandates, at least from a US side, which is something I look into more. Canada is also moving forward, and I think a lot of countries are looking at their own programs to push forward into the future and be resilient against quantum threats. But if we look at the activity set, I mean, in 2016, NIST, who are a de facto global standard provider or body, they requested nominations for PQC algorithms, ones that could be used. We went through a number of different rounds from 2017 to 2022. And in 2022, we started seeing guidance from the US government. Again, I think the US often leads a number of these initiatives, and the world generally pays attention to what the US is doing. And we started seeing things like national security mandates, which were associated with immediately deploying, in some cases, as was the case with M2302, immediately deploying post-quantum cryptography in production environments, which is a signal, I think, to the world that this is something we need to take more seriously. These things culminated in December of last year, a new public law for the US on quantum preparedness. And so, if I track that into, well, how does this bleed down into infrastructure? What does it mean in terms of what we all need to do? One example that I would look at is the National Security Agency in the US put forth last year their national, commercial secure algorithm guide, which is 2.0 for post-quantum resilience. And if we look at this time frame and we look at, because that's a big question here, is when do we need to take action? When do we need to do things? And what I would sort of look at here as somebody who develops systems is, I would say, wow, in the 2024 and 2025 timeframe for National Secure Systems, NSS, the US government is saying we need to start using these algorithms now. And we need to start, preferring these algorithms in procurement. That's a really that's a significant shift. And if what we see is, if the target time frame for those secure systems is 2030 to 2033 for completing this transition, that's a large task, and we need to move on that now. And I would just sort of say, on a practical side, we need to all start evaluating this risk, because when you have big societal changes to standards, that can be very, very difficult. And there can be lots of entrenched reasons that companies and organizations and people don't want to change. And this task is monumental. If you stop and look at all the electronic systems that you have, almost all of them that are internet connected, and some of those that are not internet connected, will be affected by this change. And so changing, all of our web connected TVs and our computers and laptops and phones and cars and microwaves, all of these things will need to change. And that's a situation where, if we don't get started soon, we're definitely not going to make the timelines where people are recommending we do those things. And from a balance of risk perspective, I would posit that we have a situation where, if we deploy too early, we'll get extra operating data, and it'll make our transitions easy. It might cost just a little bit more, but debatably, if we deploy too late, that causes a lot of the internet connected systems that we currently rely on. And when I stop and think of things in everyday life, your water systems, your traffic systems, all these physical things that we're used to, they all, at some points, use cryptography and usually asymmetric cryptography to protect them. All those things, we don't want to risk not working or being insecure for any period of time. So we really need to start moving on this transition today. So practical risk and prioritization is really important. So, as a takeaway for our audience here, I would say, organizations and, whether it's your university or your research lab or the companies you're doing research with or the companies that you're working to secure, we need to understand what our risk exposure is. And that usually starts with things like audits to inventories and audits to cryptography used in your organization. In doing that audit, the hope is to then identify vulnerable algorithms like RSA and ECC and things like Diffie-Hellman handshakes, where there could be an issue or there will be an issue eventually. And then it's about protecting the most valuable items first. So we want to assess the business impact and see, if this system were compromised, what would that actually mean? If somebody compromises my smart fridge, that is maybe a problem to eat every day. But if somebody compromises a traffic system, that could be much more problematic. And certainly if they compromised a bank or a system that held lots of private or personally identifiable information, that could be really problematic. So we need to do that risk assessment and step through, and we need to understand where we can change out those algorithms immediately and where we can start testing immediately. So in terms of how we migrate and how we start that migration, I would say this is probably something that is easier to do than a lot of people might think, at least to start, because we're starting to see things like ML-Chem, which is a X25519 Kyber 768 wrap. We're starting to see those things being deployed in different environments like web browsers and the TLS connection. And so these things can be done right away on endpoints, on load balancers, and we can start seeing, if we deploy these systems, where they would actually cause problems, or if they would cause problems at all. So I think from a performance and field testing scenario, we've been doing some work. You can expect things like the handshake elements if you're using an X25519 Kyber 768 wrap. If you use that instead of just standard RSA, you can expect some compute increase, about between somewhere in two to 5 times the computational cost, which usually is not particularly high for most systems. But it's if you have very, very small devices, that's something worth looking into for perhaps Internet of Things applications. We're also looking at quite a lot more data for that exchange, about 70 times the amount of data, which again is still in the thousands of, or depending on which implementation, but definitely into the kilobytes range, thousands of bytes as opposed to smaller numbers of bits. But these are manageable numbers that our modern systems can usually handle, and this is happening right now in the background. Google, Signal, Cloudflare, Mozilla, our governments, we're all working to try these algorithms in play. And if you open up the connection pane in one of your windows, you'll be able to see the security settings for your current TLS connection. And you're starting to see in the wild now, the security settings show that you're actually using draft 00, which is I think it was the University of Waterloo helped author some of that. I think maybe even the Canadian Cyber Institute for Cybersecurity was involved, or would at least be able to guide on this. So we see these systems in deployment today. At Lastwall, we in production are using this. It's kind of fun to log into video calls with our system and actually show somebody that hey, we're on a video call right now that's quantum secure, and or at least from our end, the other side might still be using classical cryptography. But we can show that it's possible now. We can show that this works. So in terms of a last sort of view of this, there is some resistance, and And right now, there are certainly challenges to adoptions or adoption. And I think, we put together this little graphic because right now, CISOs are, the defenders of all systems, not just the CISOs as the lead, are under a tremendous amount of pressure. They're alligators that are close to the boat, and malware, ransomware, phishing. CISOs right now are working on existential threats to their organizations that could hit them today. It's really, really hard to say how, I need to focus on a longer term vision, and I need to focus on this thing that's going to happen in, maybe 2026, 2027, 2028, hopefully. Although I will say that there are a lot of organizations and some very sophisticated technical organizations who are planning for a 2025 Q-Day scenario. But the attention and the focus and the understanding that this needs to be addressed now, I think, is the biggest problem. So that there's, our CISOs do have their hands full, and we all need to just remind them that, look, if we get started with, using hybrid systems today, we're going to learn more to be able to deploy them at scale faster in a more controlled manner. So getting started is really important. There are some technical adoption challenges. I briefly had mentioned a few of those. We do have things like libOQS, which is a library that I would recommend people look into. There are some tool support elements that are starting, but they're still not all the way there. There's definitely a shortage of cryptographic expertise, and there's cost to upgrading encryption across large enterprises or organizations. So, there are a number of factors that will hold us back. But in conclusion, I think this is something we need to focus on, and we need to take action on today. So I would sort of recap and say, quantum computers can't break everything all at once, but they can break certain or almost all types of current asymmetric cryptography that we use every day. And we need to collectively move towards a PQC secure future. We can avoid taking on extra risk of new algorithms by using hybrid systems today. And we would urge people to consider deploying TLS 1.3 with ML-Chem, which is the X25519 Kyber 768 wrap. So that's my overview presentation. And sorry for running a few minutes over. We had a bit of a rough start there, but maybe, Mohammed, now we could see if there are any questions that people have.
Sure. Thank you so much. It's really interesting talk, and I like how you went through it. Like, it's really, really smooth. You started with the threat, with the theory, then with the experiments, then like with the solutions, the challenges, and the steps. It was really amazing. I enjoyed the talk, and I hope everybody did as well. Yeah, there are some questions. I will start with this question, which is. You are aware, like with the Chinese team that they announced like a couple months ago, they have crafted new method to do factorization, and they only need 300, I think 372 qubit. So while, as you mentioned, like IBM, we already have a machine that's 400 qubits. There are some questions regarding this algorithm. So do you have any input on this?
Yeah, I think if you're referring to that press release that was put out in I think it was February of this year,
Yeah. Yes.
it had a lot of people very concerned. I think, and again, I am a practical security person. We focus on defense today. And the mathematicians that I've spoken to about that are all, they're very comfortable with the fact that maybe that is harder to implement or would not prove out. But I think, Mohammed, what it highlights is it highlights that, look, we could have a breakthrough at any time. There was research earlier this year at the University of Sussex, which showed an exchange of information, an entanglement in between processors. If you have a let's say 400 qubit processor, and you can then share information through entanglement between those processors, you've changed the scaling function to one of cost. And this is definitely a race right now that is going on to get to the first cryptographically relevant quantum computer. If you can just apply, money and build many of these processors to scale. Instead of having one 20 million qubit processor, if you can have 5,400 qubit, well, not 50, pardon me. There's my math letting me down. But if you can have a network set of processors, because it doesn't quite go linear, you have some loss, that can change things. But we could all wake up tomorrow and find out that the new IBM have been talking about their new system 2, which they're talking about 16,000 qubits, potentially even by the end of the year. Now there's still the error problem, and those are noisy systems, but we could have breakthroughs at any time. That Google had that release of their research on using advanced machine learning to do better error correction. Who knows? Maybe there's the next step of LLMs or interesting AI could significantly increase error correction capabilities in a way that would change the threshold of the number of qubits required. So we could end up in a situation where we need to be protecting ourselves much more quickly. And that when people can put forth conjecture that they can break things much sooner, I think the first thing to do is to robustly check and see if you can repeat their experiments. And if that's the case, then we immediately all need to take urgent action. But I think that in the case of the research you mentioned early this year, that wasn't generally the accepted sort of wisdom, was that this is something that can be done now. But it was sort of a warning to make us all think we need to take this seriously.
It is, and it was really scary. Like, oh, we are waiting for 10 years. Oh, it's maybe like just 1 year ahead, and we are all doomed. It was really, as you said, scary. Yeah, and thank you for elaborating on that. So we have another question here. The question said, like, how can we implement a hybrid approach within the trust chain of the public key infrastructure? And what is the sequence of migrating hybrid approach within the PKI?
Sorry, you broke up a little bit. What's the how do we deploy hybrid today? And what was the second part of the question, please?
I think it's all related about hybrid and the PKI, how we implemented it and how we migrate.
Right. Okay. So I would say the straightforward paths to implementation are to look at doing this immediately in the TLS environment. TLS 1.3 currently has the ability in common browsers. You can start experimenting with this in Chrome. And of course, it's really nice now that Edge, for example, is based on Chromium and therefore inherits some of those capabilities. But a lot of the modern browsers are working towards native support of ML-Chem. If you wanted to sort of try something immediately, you could look at the way that Signal implemented post-quantum resilience that happened about a month ago. I think they put that into production. So, as a messaging application, that they're already doing this. But it's, there's a good body of work. I would point people towards OQS and Open Quantum Secure, I believe that is. LibOQS is the library for it to start developmental work. I would look at things like Cloudflare has done some really interesting work on this, and Google have done some interesting work on this. And certainly in the next couple of months, we'll be able to do TLS 1.3 natively without any changes in the browser, in any Chromium or Chrome-based browsers. So that's something we can start looking at today, and we can start implementing today on both cloud systems and on systems where we control both sides. So if you have an application that you're deploying, you can put ML-Chem as an option in your load balancers, and provided that your clients are using a standard web browser, that's something we can do immediately and today, and it's probably the most practical, easy first step that people can take.
Thank you so much. You elaborated from so many different directions, which is really great. Thank you so much. So one of the attacks that usually target the hybrid approach is the downgrade attack. So do you think we are safe from this type of attack, or?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. If you think of a downgrade attack, that's it is something that it can be done. I mean, you can force a session to not offer earlier systems. But I think if I try to think through a progression and transition to a secure system, right now, it was not very long ago that there, I think it was in the testing of CEC PQ2, which was combined elliptic curve post-quantum 2, which is the algorithm Google and I think Cloudflare were testing in the last couple of years. Sometimes because you had a really large handshake, that made certain equipment, certain routers not work. So we need, before saying like, wow, we need to move to quantum resilient systems right now and exclusively those systems to prevent that sort of downgrade attack, the first step, because that can be done, but the first step is to immediately deploy, and get these systems into production environments to make sure that you can make this transition work without having any problems. Then after that step, that's when we should start thinking about, okay, maybe removing those downgrade attack capabilities. So I think that, I understand the question, I appreciate the question, and there is the possibility of that. If you're in an environment where you can control a lot of things, you can, make a system that will only work with hybrid cryptography. But I wouldn't suggest that as a first practical step.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, how the way like you answer it, it's really great because if we stop, we can't do anything. We should start at least with hybrid, and we accept those who are not ready to communicate with them, and gradually we all eventually will be all post quantum. Yeah, I think there is no more questions. I would really like to thank you for this, and it's really great to see like industry companies are working on this and providing solutions that are post-quantum, similar to what Lastwall is doing. Thank you for all doing that, and thank you for giving us the chance for today's webinar.
Thank you. Well, Mohammed, and just to answer that question for the person who asked, I'm not sure. I've just shared a different screen that's live. I mean, this is our authentication portal into one of our services. And if you actually pull up the secure connection settings as I was talking about, can you see that there? The fact that it's TLS13X25519 Kyber 768 draft 00. This is in the same exact browser that I'm on this Zoom call in. So this is something that is, we can deploy these systems today. We can do this right now. And again, if when we're doing internal work and we say, hey, we want to do quantum resilient only, you can eliminate that downgrade attack potential by removing those other ciphers that are classical only. So it can, we have the ability to do this now, and people should start.
That's really good and practical. Yeah, you are working on it right now. That's really interesting. Thank you for adding that. It's really good. Good motivation for others.
Seeing that it just works, it's really funny. I will give demos and talk to people, and halfway through I'll say, oh, by the way, I'll pull up a session that we've been using, and I'll pull up that connection pane and say, for the last 20 minutes, you didn't notice any difference, but this was a quantum resilient session. So, we're here now, and now it's up to the community here that are listening to run forward and try these things in production environments, and then say, hey, this worked. We need to collectively march forward.
Exactly. Thank you for that. And I hope others will get motivated by this, because companies are working on this and they need expertise on this. They need people to do research in that and to be expert in this area of research. Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, and I appreciate the Canadian Institute for Cybersecurity working to help educate our communities on important issues like this and practical things we can do today in security. So, thank you so much for having me as a speaker, and I'm sorry about the video not working the second time around here.
Thank you. We wish we can see you here, but yeah, no worries. Thank you so much, and thanks everybody for attending this session. And we would like to see you tomorrow. We have another webinars, and the day after we have 2 last webinars. We wish to see you all there. So thank you. Thanks everybody and have a good day.